everyone, it's the following day, and I did a bit of research last night on these, pardon my back again guys, on these cables, these 8 gauge cable, did a bit of research, and there's a couple of different standards, the metric wide gauge and an American wide gauge, which is probably imperial. I can't see these cables holding 80 amps. It's really, if I was going to get one and put this in the car, I would put at least a 40 amp fuse in there. You can buy maxi fuses. I'll show you later on what I found online. You can buy these maxi fuses in different ratings. You have to have an 80 amp. I would fit a 40 amp, that was me. I would fit a 40 amp fuse in there, maximum. And if I wanted to upgrade this to 80 amps, I'd buy two of these wiring kits that came with it and just run them in parallel. 40 amps and 40 amps will give you 80 amps. I would not run that gauge for 80 amps in a vehicle, in a car vehicle. You got to remember that the engine bay gets quite warm in there. There are a lot of derating factors for cables when they come into contact with heat and things like that. Guys, 80 amps is just absolute maximum in free air and at a standard room temperature of 21 degrees Celsius. I would not throw 80 amps in that cable, in this cable, in a heartbeat. If that cable there rubs up against the chassis or whatever, and you start to get insulation breakdown, that could easily reach 80 amps. I know your battery charger, when you're charging your battery, you are going to reach 80 amps. The charging your battery might reach 20 amps, and that cable can handle 20 amps, not a problem. But once you start to get wear, and you get vibrations in a four-wheel drive in a vehicle, are you up against the fender or whatever, up against the chassis, whatever, you're going to run your wires, your firewall, whatever, that might eventually rub. If you haven't got it in conduit particularly, put it in conduit. If you haven't got it in conduit, that's going to rub. Wherever it rubs, it can wear through. As it starts to wear through, the insulation breakdown starts to break down, and that current might increase, which can cause a fire. I've seen so many vehicle fires lately on the internet, and I was wondering why vehicles were catching on fire. And I reckon it's because of these sorts of reasons, that the cables have been overrated. Some people are rating these cables at 100 amps. 4 gauge wire, 100 amps. No way. Sorry, 8 gauge, not 4 gauge, 8 gauge. 100 amps, there's no way this is going to carry 100 amps, that little cable, 12 volt DC. I'll show you what I found on the internet. I'll bring the camera over in a minute. But I would, if I wanted 80 amp, I'd run 2 circuits, 2 of these wires in the unison. I'd change the 80 amp fuse to 40 amp. And once you run 2 wires, 2 of these wires, I know they're pretty cheap to buy, but once you run these 2 wires in parallel all the way through, not these ones but the others as well, you know, and the other wires that came with them, run 2 of them, 2 circuits not one, and run them in parallel. So you connect 2 of these on the same connector, and at the other end the same. So instead of running 1 circuit, you run 2, but change the fuse from a 40 amp to an 80 amp to at least 40 amp. 50 max. I wouldn't go above 40 anyway. I wouldn't even go 50. 40 amps is what I would suggest. You wouldn't go any more than that. But yeah, guys, I don't know what to say. It's, you know, these guys at factory need to review your fuses at least. I know the relay's okay, the VSR's okay, can handle 140 amps. That's the contacts. Not an issue there. They can probably handle 140 amps. The fuse can handle 80 amps, not a problem. But the wiring, the conductor size. I'll show you what I found on the internet last night. Unfortunately, I ran out of battery last night and I couldn't continue on with what I was doing. So I'm here today doing a little bit. So come around and I'll show you what I found on the internet, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Now, I'm not sure how we're gonna, how well you can see this, guys. I'm hoping you'll be able to see this. This is just a few sites I found on the internet last night. This one's from PowerStream. I think it might be a US site, and they talk a little bit about AWD sizes, which is the American wide gauge size system, which is American system. But there's also a metric wide gauge system, which is MWG, which isn't the case in this scenario. So we come down here, we find the American wide gauge size. We come down to 8 gauge, and the 8 gauge has a conductor diameter of, which is the diameter of the conductor. We need to understand what a conductor is. Conductor is a copper part, not the cable. The cable is different. Conductor size is about 3.26 millimeters, which is metric, which is going to be a conductor cross section. The cross section, this is where they fall a bit short, is 8.37 millimeters. Well, I've done a bit of calculating here for the 8 gauge. The cross section in millimeters for 8 gauge is 8.37. So it's the radius of the conductor. You square the radius and you multiply it by pi, and you end up with the area. That's not the conductor cross section as we know it. Because here in Australia we use cross section as being the diameter of the cable. It's actually the cross sectional area, which is the complete area of the cable in millimeters. This one here is the cross section that we use here in Australia, the 3.26 millimeters. That's what we use. Conductor diameter is the cross section that we use of a conductor, which is what you measure with the verniers. But in the States they use conductor cross section as being the area of the conductor. And even then that isn't true, because it's a multi-strand conductor, it's not solid core. Now if you come across here, that will give you a maximum amps for chassis wiring up here, and maximum amps for power transmission. Now we don't use chassis wiring here in Australia, or power and transmission. Chassis wiring just means that it's a single conductor running free air. We use free air here in Australia. One conductor running through free air can carry 73 amps. At room temperature, the temperature of a standard room temperature 21 degrees Celsius. Maximum amps for power transmission, I call that 24 amps. Now that is a bundled situation when you have 2, 3, 4 wires or 5 wires bundled together. 8 gauge wiring can carry up to 24 amps. That's a more conservative figure. 73 amps is I can't even explain that to you. I wouldn't even run 73 amps through 8 gauge cable. It's just way too much. In an engine bay, the engine bay gets hot. You have derating factors such as heat. No, it's just you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't put an 80 amp fuse in an 8 gauge wire. It's just not the done thing. Conservatively, 40 amps. Yeah, I could see 40 amps. Because the battery might charge at around 20 amps. So give it a little bit of leniency on that department, a little bit of discretion. But 24 amps is what it usually would draw if you had more than one cable. So if you bundle the cables together, like 4, 5, 6 cables, whatever it is, 24 amps is what the cable would be rated at, because it's no longer, it can't dissipate the heat as well, which is what happens even in the electrical field here in Australia. Now I did some calculations here. So for a copper cable under the American gauge wire 8WG for 12 volt DC, and a length in feet, which is 25, it's close to 25 feet. I measured the what they had here. I'll come up to the Kick-Ass website. Now they've got the length of cable here, which is 8WG. Red cable is 6 meters, heavy duty cable, red cable is 0.75 meters, and heavy duty cable is 0.85 meters, the black cable. So that's a complete circuit that you would have just with the cable, not including the chassis of the vehicle, because that would have to complete the circuit, but just the cable alone. And I looked at the at what it will carry at that this is the 25 feet, which is the length, roughly the length of those cables. I entered the amps, which is 80 amps, which is what they suggesting it could handle. Click to calculate. The voltage drop has been 2.5, nearly 2.6 volts. Which means if you were to draw 80 amps at the cable, you would end up with a voltage of 9.5 volts at the other end, at your charging battery. That is pretty low at 12 volts. I mean, I know you're going to get maybe 14, 16 volts, whatever it is. We can calculate that at, say, I've got 12 volts here. Well, we can't change that. No, we can't change. We put 12 volts there anyway. You might get an extra couple of volts if it's 14 volts. So instead of getting 9.4, you might get 11.4 volts of the battery. That's not going to be enough to charge it. It's going to be too much voltage drop at 80 amps. Now, battery charging ain't going to take 80 amps. It won't draw 80 amps. It'll probably draw a quarter of that. So the voltage drop will be a quarter of 2.5. So it'll be roughly 6.6 of a volt, roughly 0.6, 0.7 volt. So that will charge your battery. I mean, under normal operating conditions, the only thing I see wrong with that cable is that the fuse is wrong. I'd put a different fuse in there. I will put a 40 amp fuse at least, the minimum, for the 8 gauge wire. It can handle 24 amps under extreme conditions. So if you've got more than one circuit, a lot of cables bundled together, in a hot environment, 24 amps is what they recommend. Yeah, you could run 2 circuits and put 220 amp fuses on there. That will be ideal situation. 40 amp is better than 80 amp. I would not go an 80 amp fuse, guys. It's rated to 73, and I measured the outside diameter of the 8 gauge. I mean, I measure the wire. I'll check with the verniers again, and the outside diameter of this wire with the insulation and everything with the cable is approximately 6 millimeters. With my glasses. Pardon, guys. Just put my glasses on. It's 6 millimeters, 6.2, 6.3 millimeters, I think, with the insulation. 6.3 millimeters 8 gauge wire with the insulation. And here it's got 8.37 millimeters. So you got to question whether that cable can handle 80 amps. And the fuse is there for protection. It's there to protect the cable. If that cable cannot handle that sort of current, the insulation cannot handle. So you're looking for a fire scenario that can occur. I'd change the fuse to 40 amps, guys, ladies and gentlemen. I would not use. There's no way I'd use an 80 amp fuse in that scenario with that cable. I don't know whether these guys are aware of that or not. I've checked a few things. Super Cheap Water, I got fuses there. I know this is 80 amps and 60 amps at around $10. They got other ones, packs of 10, $63. Yeah, it's a bit $6.39 each for 50 amp and 20 amp fuses and maxi fuses. And so I got 40 amps. Here's a 40 amp orange one there, 10 packs. I'm not sure whether you can buy them single or not, but they are available. Best to be safe than sorry. This is the wiring kit that I've purchased with the this is the VSR that I purchased that we talked about yesterday. And the specs, not a problem with the VSR itself or anything else. It's just the fuse for the current capacity of the cable is what has me a little bit worried. 80 amp maxi fuse and holder. There's no way I'm going to put that fuse in. I mean, I'm going to use this cable in a different scenario. I bought it with a relay, but I'm going to use it in a different scenario, so I can drop down, the amps, not a problem. But if you're chasing 80 amps, guys, put 2 cables in and 2 40 amp fuses. Don't go with an 80 amp fuse. It's it's too much for that little cable. And in the engine bay where they usually go, where these things are connected, even less, because you have heat. The engine running at high temperatures, and the heat in the engine bay is just going to derate this cable phenomenal. It's just no. Free air, temperature 21 degrees Celsius, yeah, not an issue. Well, I shouldn't even say not an issue. I wouldn't even do it then at 80 amps. But 40 amps, guys, 40 amp fuse. That's what I recommend with this one. I'd be, what can I say? There's nothing more I can say. If it was me, I wouldn't do it. I've shown you the American wire gauge chart for 8 gauge wire. Here it is over here. You can see it just there. And the current capacity, if it's in a scenario where there's a few cables and some heat and so forth involved, they derate it to 24 amps, and this one's 73, not 80. And that's absolute maximum. I would not take this to 80 degrees as a maximum in the engine bay of a vehicle where there's a lot of derating factors. And one of the primarily ones being a hot environment, a hostile environment. No, I take this value, if not 40 amps. If not, you go, the lower you go, the better you'll be. So I wouldn't go any higher than 40 amps. But that's all I've got to say, guys. I've checked a few different sites out. This, I think, might be a site with the here we go, here, 7.71mm cable red, rated at 74 amp at 30 degrees Celsius. That's what it's rated at, 30 degrees. Can you imagine under the bonnet of a car how hot it gets? It gets a lot hotter than that. And the cross-sectional area of the battery cable. This is the issue. Another issue is that you have conductor size and you have cable size. Conductor size and cable size are two different things. Conductor is what you look at, is what's going to determine your current carrying capabilities, not your cable. Your cable is your conductor and your insulation together combined is a cable diameter. We don't use cable diameter, we use conductor diameter, and that determines your current carrying capacity, not your cable. Your conductor size is what determines that. So it gets a little bit confusing on different websites. I've seen different things. This, I think, is the standard that they use. There's a PVC hookup wire with a 89, 105 degree temperature rating. This is as close as I could find for the yellow 1015 wire, hookup wire. And I think this is very similar to what they use in their kit. But I've tried to look at characteristics and so forth, and you know, what does it say? 8 gauge AWG size. That's what 8 gauge says here. It goes to 10 gauge. It doesn't even say 8 gauge here at all. I wonder if it's got a conductor stranding nominal. That's what it doesn't even tell you what the current carrying capacity is on this. I'm not sure if it will, but yeah, look, I did a bit of research last night and I could not find, you know, exactly what cable where it comes from, but you know, comparing it to other standards, yeah, what's this one different between maximum? Oh, this is what I searched between amp for chassis and power transmission. The American standard for chassis wiring is what we use in terms of free air, a wire that is in free air, so it's suspended like you would have transmission out of the street. There's a wire out in free air, there's no insulation, there's no nothing, it's just out in free air at a standard room temperature. Is what chassis wiring, the American equivalent of chassis wiring would be. And what the Americans use is a power transmission. Power transmission is the term that the Americans use for bunched cabling, which means you got a number of cables bunched together. So it's not in contact with free air, it's insulated and it's derating the cable because of it. So, you know, chassis wiring is just, we don't use that unless it's, you know, a bus bar. We use a couple of bus bars where you don't have any insulating material on it. The bus bar is allowed to cool off in free air. We don't use that. We use power transmission where we have one or more cables bunched together and it derates the cable. So that's another thing you've got to keep in mind too. When you're connecting cables under your engine bay, when you start bunching your cables together and adding more cables, you effectively derate the current capacity of your cables that are existing and the ones that you're installing. So just bear that in mind. Always pays to go a little bit bigger than a little bit smaller, and they yeah, so it's just one of those things, guys. I'll let it go there and I'll talk about something else in a minute. Okay.